Listen to this for a second. A degrading thirst after outrageous stimulation, fueled by big national events and too many people crammed into cities. Sound familiar? It sounds like someone tweeting about our 24/7 news cycle or the endless scroll of social media, right? But here's the thing. That was written in the year 1800 by the poet William Wordsworth. And his diagnosis of this problem, well, it led him to start a revolution.
So let's get into it. We are talking about a document that, on the surface, is just the preface to a book of poems. But Wordsworth's preface to Lyrical Ballads was so much more than that. It was, and I'm not kidding, a full-on rebel's manifesto, a declaration of war against the entire poetic establishment of his day. And honestly, we're still feeling the shockwaves from it today.
Now, to really get why this was so huge, you have to understand what poetry was like back then. Think stuffy, think formal. It was totally trapped by these rigid, artificial rules. It was packed with this over-the-top language about, gods and ancient heroes, all written in a style that had absolutely nothing to do with how real people actually talked or lived.
And the main villain in Wordsworth's story? It actually has a name, poetic diction. This was the big idea that poetry had to use some kind of special, elevated language, like a secret code full of fancy words and twisted phrases you'd never ever use in a real conversation. Wordsworth saw this as a totally corrupting force, calling it a motley masquerade that was literally strangling the life out of poetry.
And right here, you can see the battle lines being drawn. On one side, you've got everything Wordsworth was fighting against. He called it gaudiness, inane phraseology, just a bunch of arbitrary tricks. And his solution on the other side? It was simple. Poetry should use the real language of men. It should be about things that are permanent, philosophical, and powerful because of its simplicity, not its complexity.
So, in 1798, he and his good friend Samuel Taylor Coleridge just dropped a bomb on the whole literary scene. It was a collection of poems called Lyrical Ballads, and Wordsworth made it super clear right in the preface that this was an experiment. He wasn't just writing some new poems, he was out to prove a radical new theory.
And here was the core of that experiment, his big hypothesis. Could you actually write poems about ordinary, everyday people? I'm talking shepherds, villagers, children, and do it in plain, simple language and still create something deeply moving? Could the ordinary be made extraordinary just by paying close enough attention to it?
Now, Wordsworth had some very specific reasons for focusing on what he called humble and rustic life. He was convinced that out in the country, the big essential passions of the heart, love, grief, joy, were just pure. They were less restrained by the phony manners of city life. He argued these elementary feelings were deeply connected to the natural world, which made them more authentic, more permanent, and way more philosophical than the passing trends of society.
So this whole experiment naturally leads to a huge question. If poetry is about everyday people and everyday language, then what even is a poet? The old idea was that a poet was this lofty genius, some special kind of person way above the rest of us. Well, Wordsworth was about to tear that entire idea to shreds.
And this is his answer. It is so simple, but it is so incredibly profound. A poet is simply a man speaking to men. That's it. They aren't a different species. Sure, maybe a poet has a more lively sensibility or a more comprehensive soul, as he put it, but they are fundamentally the same as all of us, feeling the same things we all feel.
And building on that, he makes another absolutely explosive claim. There should be no essential difference between the language of prose and metrical composition. This was total heresy at the time. It meant a poem should be just as clear and make as much sense as any well-written paragraph. No more hiding behind fancy, meaningless words.
You see, he didn't see poetry and prose as distant cousins. To him, they were siblings. They're made of the exact same stuff, animated by the same life force. As he beautifully put it, the same human blood circulates through the veins of them both. One just happens to have rhythm and meter.
Okay, so this brings us to Wordsworth's most famous line, the one basically everyone has heard. Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And it kind of sounds like he's just saying, let your emotions run wild on the page, right? Just pure, unfiltered feeling. But that's only half the story.
Because right after that, he adds this absolutely crucial part. That overflow is worthless unless it comes from a mind that has thought long and deeply. So it's not just about feeling something intensely. It's about understanding that feeling, thinking about it, and finding its deeper truth. And this all builds into a very clear process, his famous idea of emotion recollected in tranquility. So here's how it works. First, you have a powerful experience in real life, but you don't write then. You wait. Later, in a calm moment, in tranquility, you recall that feeling, and as you contemplate it, a new emotion is created in your mind, one that's related to the original but filtered through thought and time. That is the state where the real poem begins.
Okay, so this brings up a pretty logical question, right? If you're so committed to using the real language of men, and you think poetry should be a lot like prose, then why bother with meter and rhyme at all? Isn't that just another one of those artificial tricks you were fighting against?
Wordsworth had an absolutely brilliant answer for this. He argued that meter isn't just for decoration, it's a tool for managing emotion. You see, when you're writing about really intense or painful subjects, the steady, predictable rhythm of meter actually helps to restrain that passion. It keeps it from becoming too painful or overwhelming for the reader. Plus, it adds its own kind of music, its own pleasure, that makes it easier to engage with difficult feelings.
And this brings us to the bottom line. For Wordsworth, the poet really only has one job, one single restriction, the necessity of giving immediate pleasure to a human being. And he didn't see pleasure as some cheap or trivial goal. He saw providing this pleasure as a profound act, an homage paid to the native and naked dignity of man, arguing that all our empathy and knowledge is built on a foundation of pleasure.
So in the end, what this incredible manifesto really did was tear down all those artificial walls that had been built around poetry for centuries. Wordsworth brought it back down to earth. He showed us that the most profound truths can be found in the simplest things, spoken in the clearest language. He completely democratized the art form. And he left us with this absolutely grand, magnificent vision of what a poet should be. In a world that was getting faster, more fragmented, more overstimulated, sound familiar? The poet's job was to be a rock of defense for human nature. Their purpose was to pay attention to the fundamental feelings that connect every single one of us, binding together the vast empire of human society.
And that brings us full circle, right back to where we started. All of Wordsworth's arguments from over 200 years ago feel unbelievably relevant right now. I mean, in an age of deepfakes and AI-generated content, his big questions are still our questions. What does art owe to real life? And in all the noise, where do we find what's authentic, what's permanent, and what's true?